All right, and we're live. Well, welcome to the show. And today I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your career, about what you do at the Air Force as a documentary filmmaker. Just tell me a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I'll start just in my current role as a lead producer director at the 3rd Audiovisual Squadron at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. That's got a lot of words in it. But to make it simple, the way to think about it is that the Air Force is just like any organization. They have a story to tell, they have videos to produce, and one of the ways that the Air Force tries to save taxpayer money is by having internal people to do that work for them when possible. So we're basically like an independent film production studio within the Air Force, right? So clients come to me, they may have a communication objective, and then what I do as producer director is I sit down, analyze what those goals are, who they're trying to reach, what formats of distribution they're thinking about doing, what their budgets are, and then basically with that information, kind of understand once I kind of understand who their target audience is and what their distribution method is, that's what's going to help me kind of craft what best way to create a video for them, right? Is this going to be a vertical video on social media, or is this going to be a cinematic type piece that we're going to put out on YouTube that's long form piece? So it really just kind of depends on the client. I know you mentioned documentary. I definitely have done documentary, but we do documentaries, training videos, scripted productions, basically anything that an Air Force client might require. So,
Wow, that's incredible. Who are your clients typically? Like, do you have an
yeah, so
example?
all,
Maybe they.
yeah, good question. I mean, all of
Okay.
our clients are within the Department of Defense, right?
Okay.
So, for instance, if the Secretary of the Air Force, if their office has a video project they want to produce, they might come to our office to do that. My most recent project I worked on was with Space Force, actually, and it was for the anniversary of GPS. So basically, GPS had like two anniversaries that coincided: the 50th anniversary of really smart people drawing it on a piece of paper and saying, "Wouldn't this be cool?" and the 30th anniversary of it actually becoming fully mission capable. And so we did a couple of different video products for them, two YouTube products that were like longer form pieces that talked about the history of GPS, things like that, and then a quick Instagram reel that went out. So that's kind of a recent product. Dialing it back a few years, you mentioned documentary. I did a documentary for Air Force basic training, and that actually started out as them saying, "Hey, we have this change in basic training, and we'd like you to help communicate that change." And one of the things that I always wanted to do working for the Air Force was an actual like long form documentary of somebody just going through the whole process of basic training. And so I was able to kind of pitch that idea to them. And so with partnership of basic training and Air Force recruiting service, we're actually be able to create a really in-depth 8-part docuseries on basic training that did really well. So really just kind of depends. They're all DoD clients, but just depends on, who they are, what they need.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's incredible. What is it like making a documentary for the U.S. Air Force? Like, how difficult is it to pitch a project like that, get a budget, get the equipment, get a crew, people who are willing to even star in the documentary, who are willing to
Sure.
let you follow them around for 8 weeks with a camera?
I will tell you this, knowing freelance documentarians, I have it easy. And here's why. Anybody who has ventured into a documentary, you pour your heart and soul in it. You know it's always an extremely risky endeavor that can kind of fail at any moment. And getting money for it is tough. Those are three things I don't have to worry about. Because if I get the buy-in of my client, which I think that is always difficult no matter what, right? Whether civilian sector, government sector, trying to convince people that you have a good idea and that's worth pursuing, especially one that has some inherent risks involved and some costs involved that maybe a client's not used to spending. Um, it takes a level of salesmanship, and I don't use that in a dirty way, but by salesmanship, I mean letting them understand the actual benefit of that risk and why that investment's worth it. You do have to be able to clearly articulate that to get people on board. The second thing that's really important, and this is the same case for government documentary as well as civilian documentary, you have to have people that trust you, right? So I was in a kind of a, I guess, perfect storm, if you want to call it that, where the people that I knew at the basic training area, like they were good friends of mine. Like we had served together when we were both in uniform. Although I left active duty service quite a long time ago now, he happened to still be in, and he was now the chief of basic training. So when he came with this idea and I pitched it back to him, he knew he could trust me. And he knew that if I was leading it, he wasn't going to have to worry about whether this thing was going to be done well, done professionally, done safely, all those things that, they're going to be concerned about in the basic training environment. So, access is everything for documentary, right? And it's the same thing within the government. I would say, and that's why when I think about challenges, it's hard for me to think about challenges because I feel like my counterparts in the civilian sector doing civilian documentary have it so much harder. It's one of the reasons why I personally do work for the government is there's a certain safety net, right? Where, I'm being paid regardless of what happens, where I know for
Right.
a civilian documentarian, it's like, man, if this project goes bust, I might be risking my career on it. The pressure, I have so much respect for
Yeah, of
folks out
course.
there because it's so hard. So I feel like I was kind of in a choice situation where I got to do this massive project, have access that nobody gets to have because of who I know, where I'm at, and do it within the safety and the confines of a full-time job, right? The second part of your question, when you asked about how hard is it getting crew, getting equipment, things like that. So where I work, it's, like I said, a small production company. So we literally have camera people, gaffers, grips, all those folks that work on our staff. The difference being is that our staff is like a jack of all trades. So they're called public affairs airmen. They're active duty service members. But where I work at the 3rd Audiovisual Squadron, they will be grips, gaffers, camera operators, sound people, ADs, the whole bit. But they're learning how to do that when they get there. And then we make them into that. And then when they leave and they may go work for another base, they might be community relations. They might be print journalism. They might be 1,000 different things. So the one challenge that we do face where I am and the challenge I face all the time is that I don't have experienced crew, like hardly ever. So there's a certain level of training that goes into every project. So when we took on the basic documentary, I spent the summer before we started filming at basic training with my crew, like just practicing, learning the camera system, reviewing footage. That's where like the professor in me comes out, and I have to start working with them and teach them and train them and make sure that they're ready to do this mission because, the good thing about working with military people is that they understand, I guess, the importance of following through, right? So, once they're trained, once they're ready, and I tell them this is now your mission and you have to do it to the best of your ability, they take that seriously, the majority of them, right? So in that way, that worked out well for me. I had a very small crew. It was me as main camera operator and director. I had a second camera operator and I had a sound person. And then we had one person who stayed behind as kind of our DIT person. So that was it, really small crew. And we spent 5 weeks on the road filming
Wow.
all these different folks at their different locations. So we went to like La Cruces, New Mexico. We went to Illinois. We went to Missouri. We went to Massachusetts. So bounced all over the place, right? And the whole idea for that was we wanted to be able to let people see like the humanity in them, who they are as people, before they arrive to basic training. And basic training, basically their job is to form you into an airman and a team. And so there's a certain amount of your own individuality that has to be stripped away to do that. So we wanted to make sure that the audience was able to connect with the individual before they actually watched that transformation. And then we did spend the next 8 weeks embedded basically with them at basic training. And so we pretty much worked 6 days a week, took 1 day off a week, for rest. But the hours were all over the place. I mean, there might be 1 hour in the morning we're there at 4 a.m. and we don't leave till 9 p.m. Other days we'd, get there at noon and stay till, 10 p.m. It just kind of depended, but I mean, we're working every day. We came back with 20 terabytes worth of footage.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it was a beast. And, I think back because I gave my DIT a bit of a hard time. She was a young airman and she made some mistakes. I was not happy about it. But when I look back at it now, a few years removed, I'm like, wow, what an awesome responsibility she had, taking that footage every single day, reviewing it, logging it, copying it, and then leaving cards out for us saying, yes, these are cleared and copied for us to warily walk in there in the dark 30 to just grab cards, put in cameras, and go and format. So it was quite a process.
I
But
bet
it
that
was a lot of
sounds
fun.
like it.
It was a project of a lifetime, really.
That's incredible. Oh man, you said 5 people total?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, 5 people for
Wait,
that.
did we fill 4 or 5? We had. I think that's been a few years.
That really is a skeleton crew for that long of a
3,
project.
4, 5. Yeah, we had 5. Oh,
5,
so on the
5
team,
people.
yeah, we filmed 5 people, and then we had 1, 2, 3, 4 on the team. So we had
Okay.
myself, camera operator, sound person, DIT. So it was a 4-person team. When we got into post production, I did most of the editing on my own, but I started to bring in some airmen as assistant editors that were able to kind of start cutting. I would call it an assembly edit, really. They were pretty much just putting all the footage together, like camera one, camera two sound, syncing it all, laying it all out in this giant timeline. And then I was able to kind of look at that and then look at the sheet from the DIT and be like, oh, this is when this happened. Oh, that was a cool point. I remember that. Like, let's go check that out. So that kind of helped. But the first episode was really hard to edit because it was 5 weeks on the road. And that means 5 weeks of footage. And I did that one all by myself because I wasn't really sure how to bring the airmen in to do assembly at that point. And when we first started the project, we didn't know if it was going to be a feature film or a docuseries. I was going to kind of let the story tell itself, right? But once I started going through the footage, I was like, yeah, this is a docuseries because I could do one entire episode just on the hometown thing. And it's worth it because it's interesting, you know? So, yeah.
That is really interesting. So where did you air this docuseries? Is this just online? Is it just for Air Force recruits and people to watch? Is it out to the public, basically?
It is. It's out to the public. So it's streamed. Okay. We did a partnership with Air Force Recruiting Service. They actually did a YouTube live stream kind of when it would come out. Like it would have a premiere or a YouTube premiere, which was pretty fun to watch. It was the first time I'd ever been a part of that. But now it just lives on YouTube. So you can go to Air Force Recruiting Service's YouTube page and see it. There was a little instance with some, when you work with a recruiting service, they have a contract with a big ad agency that does most of their heavy lifting. And so we kind of went through that for distribution, but unfortunately there really wasn't money tied to it. So in order to make it happen, they ended up compressing all the episodes down to 720p, which killed me inside.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know. But so what we ended up doing after that, after the initial release, it was like a year later, they did a 4K re-release. So it actually exists in two places on YouTube. You could look at the main one on Air Force Recruiting Services YouTube page, which you could read all the comments and see what everybody's been talking about over the last few years, which that's kind of fun. I enjoy jumping in there every once in a while and see what people are still saying. And then the 4K re-release was on the Air Force's official YouTube page. So you have Air Force Recruiting Services YouTube page, then you have the Air Force's YouTube page. The Air Force's YouTube page doesn't have as big of an audience, but that's where the 4K one exists. So I always tell people, if you really want to watch it on your TV and see it in the way it was meant to be presented, I would jump on that link. If you want to read all the comments and join the dumpster fire a little bit, then watch the one on Recruiting Service. But it's actually kind of cool because, it's been 2 years, and I'll go on there and people are still talking about it. Like, they're still saying, wow, I'm so glad I watched this. And what really as a storyteller I get excited about is when I talk about the characters. Like, I read their comments through the episodes, and by episode 5, like, wow, I can't believe this person's like this, and blah blah blah. And it's like that's kind of fulfilling to check in on every once in a while.
Oh, for sure, yeah, that's awesome. Well, you've done your job right when you see something like that.
Yeah.
So, how did you get into filmmaking in general? You are in this position now. You work for the Air Force. You've done a documentary. You do videos. Talk to me a little bit about before that. How did you get in a position? How did you learn all of this crazy equipment and sound? And it's just, there's so much to learn.
There's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
So I consider myself a storyteller first. And I think that's something that you have or don't have in some ways. You can learn storytelling techniques, but there's kids you meet that just have a story to tell you every time, right? You'll meet this 6-year-old kid and you're like, wow, that's an interesting world you live in. I was that kid. Writing stories, telling stories. I remember in first grade, a friend of mine, we got together and had Channel 1 News and we'd go around and interview our friends and stuff so it was always part of me, right? My senior year in high school, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I grew up in Connecticut, it's where I'm originally from. And there was a school called the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, and they had a night program. And so I actually started there, did their night program. So I learned TV news, I learned radio, things like that. I really loved radio a lot. And so I started working in radio a little bit after high school, but I didn't have the constitution for it. So it was cutthroat. This is back in, I'll date myself, but this is in, 99, right? And the radio personality was just such a jerk. I could not stand being around him. He treated everybody like garbage. And I was like, I don't want to. And I was also kind of a prideful young teenager thinking I know everything, right? And I just couldn't stand it. I was like, I can't survive in this. I'm going to flip out on this dude. And so a buddy of mine was going in the Air Force. And I was like, you know what? I want to get out of Connecticut. I want to go see the world, do something different. Let me check this out. So I went, saw a recruiter. did a base visit over at Hanscom Air Force Base. I was like, okay, yeah, I could do this. I could live here for a while, right? Joined the Air Force, and when I joined, I was like, I'm going to do something completely different. Nothing to do with broadcasting, storytelling. I just want to do something crazy I could only do in the Air Force. And so I originally signed up for explosive ordnance disposal, EOD.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Quite different from documentary filmmaking.
Yeah. So here's the funny part. Thankfully for me, at the time, they would send you through this 1 week prep course, right? During this 1 week prep course, you were like, studying was ridiculous. Like every day locked in a room studying. But then you had the field exercises where you had to go out and like, diffuse dummy bombs and stuff. And oh my God, that's where I learned something about myself. I was like, I'm not cut out for this. I'm dripping sweat, shaking, like it's not good. Well, at the end of the week, they send you in front of a board and they basically first tell you whether they think you can move forward. And they said, hey, you know what? Academically, you did fine. We think you can move forward to the next phase of training. What do you want to do? And I was like, not it. Let me out. And they were like, okay, no problem. That's why we do this. And so they basically give you an option to write down what jobs you want. And on there I put like, this is when the Air Force had a lot of different creative arts career fields. They had videography, they had photography, they had public affairs. And I basically was putting all those down, right? And a couple weeks later, I get my orders for my next job. And they say, oh, you're going to be a helicopter crew chief. Oh, I'm working on helicopters now. So did that for a couple of years. Still was not my cup of tea. But thankfully, I was smart enough to be able to read. I mean, the Air Force has a design so that a dummy like me could keep an aircraft from crashing. I was able to like read the manual and do the maintenance. And of course, I had supervisors making sure I didn't screw it up. So I did that, did honor guard for a little time during that time too, which was really awesome, being able to be part of like full honors burials, veteran services, things like that. But at that point, they give you what they call like a cross-training window where you can tell the Air Force, hey, I've done my time. I'd like to have an opportunity to do a career I really want, right? And so at that point, I was able to put in for broadcasting, which was radio, television broadcasting at the time. And I got picked up for it. So I was able to go to training for that and had my first duty assignment at AFN Korea. So I got to work in Seoul, Korea, which was amazing. I got to have a radio show that was broadcast peninsula-wide. I got to do the newscast. It was a grind, crazy hours. Like there was times where I'd be doing the morning show at 5 a.m. and then the newscast at 6 p.m. Like there was some pretty wild stuff. But it was like a trial by fire, man. I mean, I learned so much going through that. And they had great training too. So it was a really fun time. I think my pivot to production came when I came to San Antonio, where I am now. I worked for Air Force Recruiting Service, and they have a very small creative section that does basically public service announcements, TV PSAs, like good old boy messaging, like do your homework, stay in school, don't do drugs, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then also got to do some of their career field videos for airforce.com, which was super cool. And it was really there that I wish I had the book with me. That I bought the Filmmaker's Handbook. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but
I am familiar. Yes.
To me, I adore that book. I buy every edition when a new one comes out, and that is honestly what taught me a lot about the technical stuff, because I'm not a very technical person, much more into the storytelling, creative part of it. And I had to force myself to learn the technical part of it, camera operation, all the different things that you need to know about how the pieces and parts come together. That book I still give young airmen when they come to the 3rd Audiovisual Squadron. If they look at me and like, I don't understand all any of this stuff, I'm like, listen, just thumb through this thing. Like stop in a couple pages, just read it. Like it'll start to open up your mind a bit about things. Because you can YouTube all day long, but if you don't know what to search, or they start talking to you and you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, I feel like that's a good baseline. Then go to YouTube, like get some baseline with Filmmaker's Handbook, then go over. But that's kind of how I made the pivot to what I would consider more like traditional production. Worked there, and then as you and I have spoke about before about my past, when I was active duty, ended up getting ill after a deployment to Afghanistan, came home, and ended up with aplastic anemia, which is a bone marrow failure disorder. So touch and go, almost died, but knock on wood, I was very lucky. I had an unrelated donor on the bone marrow registry who saved my life. And so thanks to him, although my Air Force active duty career was over, I was able to then pursue my MFA in film through the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and then eventually come back to work for the Air Force as a civilian. So the quick plug for NMDP. Now they're going by Be the Match anymore, by the way.
No, I was going to
NMDP.
say it's Be the Match. Yeah,
It's really
NMDP. That's
confusing.
going to take a
NMDP. I know it was
second.
always the original National Marrow Donor Program, but if anybody's listening to this and they don't know about it, look it up, because if you join that registry, you literally could save someone's life. I remember talking to my donor. The one thing he said to me, and this is when, I don't know, he's in his 20s probably. He was like, "This might be the most important thing I ever do in my life." So, think about that. I would not be here. My kids would not have had a father. My wife would not have had a husband. And that all happened, and I'm healthy here today because of him. So, all that to say, got the MFA, and then came back to work. Came back to work for the Air Force over at the 3rd. So, that's kind of my history in a nutshell.
Wow. Well, you have such an incredible story. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, you and I both have huge respect for the Be the Match Foundation. I'm sorry, I can't say NMPD.
NMDP.
I'm going to just
right?
keep calling it Be the Match. Yeah, it does not roll off the tongue at all.
I'm trying to help them out, though, Miles. I'm trying. But Be the Match is so
National
good.
Marrow Donor Association. Yeah.
NMDP. NMDP.
MDP. Yeah, we're going to have to practice that. But yeah, they're such an incredible organization. A family member, a close family member of mine, has worked there for 2 years now. And then actually over this past New Year's, I got the chance to meet my bone marrow donor, which was incredible.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, super cool. He is just a dude from Germany. He was like, yeah, he was in his 20s when he donated also. He was like, yeah, it just seemed like, the right thing to do. And he was just so nonchalant about it. I'm like, well, you don't get it. You don't get the weight of like what your actions have been able to do. Like, it's crazy. So from the recipient side, I feel like there's a much different reaction than from the donor side.
Yeah, for sure.
What is your opinion on the current discourse of artificial intelligence in the creative industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm obsessed with staying on top of it.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm part of a working group within Air Force Public Affairs, AI and PA, because they're trying to understand how the best ways to, quite frankly, leverage it when we need to, but then also continue to have the public trust of knowing what's real and what's not. So I'll talk at it from two different angles, I think. In my work, with the Department of Defense, being honest about what we put out is the most important thing. Public trust is everything. So, as a creator, I'm super interested in Adobe Firefly and what Adobe's doing, because Adobe is creating AI programs that aren't stealing. It's all the stuff that generates through Firefly and AI comes from public domain or from their stock footage library that they've purchased and bought. I will say that means it's not quite as good yet. I think it'll probably get there. But some of their tools, like what they're doing with Photoshop, is incredible. But the video side of it's got a way to go. But then you look at, was it Sora on ChatGPT that just came out?
Sora,
yeah.
I think
that
it's
is
Sora.
mind-blowingly good.
Yeah.
Scary good.
For sure.
So here's how I look at it. If you are a technician, it might get hard. I'm just going to be real. Like, I feel like if you're, camera operator, cinematographer, set designer, costumer, I really do worry about the amount of work that might be lost through these technologies. That's the negative, and that's how I feel about it. It's Ken's opinion. The other negatives are how it can be used nefariously from adversarial countries, and they already are doing it. So that makes me concerned, because we need to be able to find ways to call it out when it is that. Like there is kind of a trail you can kind of dig through to kind of find out what's real and what's not, but it's not easy, right? So that's a concern for me. On the positive side, it's going to allow independent creatives to make things they've never made before. If you're a good writer, if you're a good director, if you're a good editor, you're going to be able to create scenes that you couldn't do before. Like, I think for me, like, I'm getting ready to do this, potentially going to do this piece on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if I could jump into Sora and like type a historical prompt? Soldier runs through the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. You see the sweat glisten off his brow as he looks up at gunfire around him. And then I could have a 50-second clip made like that. That is beautiful. Like,
yeah, of
it's
course.
insane. Like, So
Right.
somebody like me who doesn't have the budget to recreate D-Day and hire an actor and do all that might be able to do something like that using AI in the future. Um, but so yeah, there's pros and cons to it. I think it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, of course. It's certainly not an easy answer. And I share the same opinion in regards to some people on the creative side losing work. I've talked to several storyboard artists and production designers in the industry, especially in the animation industry, and they are worried. They are so worried. And they have a right to be. They should be.
Yeah.
But I have seen the benefits myself. I use Photoshop a lot, and the generative fill has been one of the most amazing tools to use. And that's AI. It's great. And so I have a lot of respect for Adobe for not, stealing stealing from other people's work that are it's already out on the internet without permission, right? Like you said, a
Yeah.
lot of that stuff comes from stock that they own, that they have public IP. So it's great to use for that. But something like Sora is Sora, does Sora use public IP?
So
Or is it
I
stock?
think
I don't
so.
remember.
I'm pretty sure it's using, because Sora is on the ChatGPT platform, right? It's done by
Yeah.
OpenAI. And
Okay.
so I'm not 100% sure about this, but I don't believe any other company other than Adobe is sticking only to what they own.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Um,
what I thought too.
that's what I thought. Again, hey, whoever watches and listens, look it up. But
Yeah,
from what I
yeah,
understand,
seriously, please go fact check.
yeah, go fact check. Because from what I understand, Adobe is the only one doing it, which is one of the reasons why the Defense Department is kind of interested in that, because we feel like, oh, if we use that, we can know that we're not stealing and from creators, because that is to me something that could sink a lot of this, is that if a band, and honestly, if I wasn't a storyboard artist, I was a filmmaker, whatever, and I knew that my work was being sampled to be, learned from and then recreated using AI. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen down the road. There could be a major lawsuit that comes down,
Yeah, of course.
right? And so, but proving that's going to be really hard. Like, I imagine they're going to have to be like, yeah, OpenAI, AI, you're going to be forced to show us where your learning models came from, and some of that may be out there. I don't know, but um, yeah, that Sora stuff is good.
It's crazy good.
Yeah.
Yeah, even on sometimes scrolling through YouTube Shorts or Instagram or TikTok, like you'll see people, politicians, actors, famous people, maybe endorsing a product, maybe saying something, promoting something, and you look at it for a second, and there are just these little like glimpses, these little like areas in the voice where it doesn't sound quite right. And you're like, I don't know, but it's scary because if you don't take the time to really pay attention, it looks so real.
Oh yeah. Well, like just recently during was it the New Hampshire primary where somebody had created the Joe Biden robocall to tell them basically don't go and vote,
Yeah.
and I mean it sounded like President Biden, and like
Mm-hmm.
to me that is not politics. That is subversion of democracy. And
Oh,
I
absolutely.
don't care if you're conservative, Republican, or liberal Democrat, whatever. You cannot be for that. You can't be for anybody of any political ilk stealing and mimicking and suppressing the right of Americans to vote, because that's the only thing that binds us together is a constitution and the right to vote. And so
Yeah.
when you start tinkering with those sacred, pillars of our democracy, you're messing with stuff that shouldn't be messed with. So
Oh,
my hope is
absolutely.
that our leaders understand that and you know don't engage in that kind of stuff, and really hopefully fiercely prosecute those that do.
Yeah, for sure. I am of the same mind. I 100% agree. There's a book that I've been meaning to read called Super Intelligence. I forget who the author is. I don't know if you've heard of it, but he
I
breaks
haven't.
down in like a really dummy way, like what AI is, what it can do, where these learning models come from, how they're coded, how they're developed. It's really interesting. Just some of the stuff that I've seen about the book. I don't know if you've read it or not, but
I
I
haven't. No,
recommend.
super
Yeah,
intelligence. That's called.
Super Intelligence, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'm super interested in the whole AI thing and the discourse and all of that, but it's only been a recent interest of mine. So I'm still kind of learning about all of that. But I wanted
I'm
to talk
balancing it in
to.
two different career fields. I'm balancing it in my day job, but then also I'm an adjunct professor, and so we're trying to see how do we teach students to leverage it in a way that doesn't inhibit their growth as creative professionals, right?
Yeah, of
So, like
course.
for me, where I teach a directing course, I have no problem with them dabbling with ChatGPT to write a screenplay and then edit it from there or do whatever, because they're not screenwriters in my class. They're not graphic designers, right? So in my personal class I teach, they have a lot of freedom,
Right.
because as far as directing, it's got to come from here. Like, you have to be able to put it together. Like, you have to
Absolutely.
formulate that. So if you could put all the pieces and shoot the film, then great. Now, if generative AI video becomes, I mean, even still, I would probably not have a problem with that as a director. If you were able to write the prompt from up here of what you want and it creates it, what's the difference from you telling a cinematographer and an actor and whatever to do it? As far as the directing part goes, I understand the
Right.
bigger effect on the
Yeah.
industry. But as far as like teaching people to direct, I don't know. It's interesting. But yeah, so
It
it's,
is
I'm
interesting.
dealing with it in two different worlds now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's super interesting. You got the safety side and then the creative side. It's
hmm
crazy. You made a short film a while ago. Her Unlikely Kin. Tell me about that.
hmm Yeah, so as we talked about, I had the bone marrow transplant and had to leave active duty service, and went ahead and pursued my MFA in film. And the reason for that was I felt like I kind of learned production as I went along, but I really wanted to be immersed 100% into filmmaking. And so the Vermont College of Fine Arts is kind of a unique program where it's a low residency MFA. So I was able to stay home in San Antonio, but go up to Vermont twice a year for my residencies. And so the first semester, I actually tried doing a documentary on a bone marrow transplant, working with, at the time, called Be the Match, now NMDP, and met with the CEO at the time. And it went well, but what I realized was that that was going to be like a 5 year project. This was not going to happen in 2 years during MFA. So I kind of had to shelve it. And at the end of my first semester, I quickly just like wrote up my first screenplay that I ever wrote, and it was horrible. But the next semester, that screenplay was slowly crafted into Her Unlikely Kin. And the story about Her Unlikely Kin is a story about a young girl who is in need of a bone marrow transplant. And the only chance for her survival is a veteran battling PTSD. And so the question of the film is he able to overcome his own demons to help save her life? So obviously, there's a lot of me in this film. I don't have PTSD. That's not something that I personally have struggled with, but I've had obviously the military service, and I've had the bone marrow transplant. And so, for me, I made the film because I wanted to have a creative storytelling effort that helped people connect with that kind of story, right? Something where people could watch it, and then hopefully by the end of it, it's something that they never knew about, maybe, and now they think twice about it, right? Um, I don't like to say that I don't necessarily think I made it to be like it's not a PSA, right? It's not a joy and be the match. It's the right thing to do. There is a call at the end of the film that if you want to, you can. But I definitely approached it from more of, if people watching this film think differently about themselves and their place in the world amongst other people, then I did my best effort, right? If they just think twice about, wow, I could literally be the prescription to save someone's life. Like, wow, I never knew that. I never thought about that. If they even have that level of thought, then I think I succeeded. But I do know, people had joined the registry from it, so that felt really good to know that it did have that kind of impact. But I was so really quite blessed with that project. We were able to raise money via Kickstarter for it, so we were able to pay our actors, pay our crew. I had a fantastic DP, David Pinkston, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but just an amazing giver of his time. A crew and a cast I didn't deserve, like as a newer filmmaker. Even though I had experience in industry in a way, this was a new approach for me being a narrative filmmaker, right? And just had so many people. My wife helped out so much with the project. My kids were involved in it. It was all hands on deck. And had a nice little festival run. We took Best Short at Las Cruces Film Festival, which is a really well run professional film festival. And then the other one was at the South Texas Underground Film Festival out in Corpus, also run by very lovely people. And then the other claim to fame I have that I keep in my hip pocket, that I every once in a while hold out to make myself feel better, is that I went for the Student Academy Award, and I was a semifinalist for the Student
Oh,
Academy
wow.
Award. So I was one step away from going to the ceremony and meeting Daisy Ridley, who was the one who was handing out the award that year.
That's
But
incredible.
but so I got the semifinalist Student Academy Award, which I feel pretty proud about just of that. So it taught me a lot. I think the film did what it should do, and it's something I'm still proud of, even these years later, looking back at it. Even when I see the flaws and things I could have done better, I still feel good about it.
Right. Well, yeah, absolutely. Especially if that's a first narrative-driven project and it went that far, that's some serious talent. That's crazy. Have you kept
Appreciate
up
it.
with screenwriting and things of that sort since then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not as well as I should. So it's funny you say that. I mean, I grade screenplays all the time now, right? I'm reading, I'm providing feedback. My own son is a filmmaker. I'm looking at his scripts, I'm doing that. But writing takes a lot out of me. I know it takes a lot out of anybody, right? But sitting down to take the time to write, I just haven't made that a priority. And that's the honest truth. Um, Working for the Air Force has given me a creative outlet that I didn't expect to really have. I always thought I was going to have kind of the day job and then find my creative fulfillment elsewhere. But I've been able to do just really great work for the last 7 years. That has not made me have the itch to do more. Um, so sometimes I'm a little disappointed because I remember when I finished Her Unlikely Kin, I was like, okay, I want a feature before I'm 40. Just a goal. Like I want to make a feature film before I'm 40. Well, as I approached 40, I got all into uh, the basic training documentary in pre-production, and then through production and post-production, and it was like a 2 to 3 year project, right? So before I knew it, I was past my 40s, and I'm looking back, I'm like, oh, I passed 40, and I didn't make that feature film, but I made this docu-series that was Emmy nominated, so I feel amazing about that, right? So, I don't know. I feel like the only way I could ever really get back into screenwriting and start, I guess, working into my own creative ideas that way would have to be, I'd have probably have to stop teaching because I can't work with the Air Force and teach the adjunct job and have anything left over for, for
Right,
that.
of
So,
course. Raise a
yeah.
family and yeah, it's
Yeah. And
crazy.
my kids are getting older now. So, there is going to be more time, I know, given back to me as I move forward. So I do want to do it again. There's no doubt about that. But I also have removed the arbitrary pressure of a timeline or deadline for it because I no longer feel the creative need to do it. Like I feel very fulfilled creatively, and I'm lucky to say that. And I feel good about giving back through teaching and through teaching airmen or teaching as a professor. So I'm getting a lot of satisfaction in other areas that's not making me chase that as much as I thought I would be at this point. So, but I still do love it, and I do hope it's something that comes back for me.
Yeah, of course. Well, that kind of leads into my next question. If you were given $200 million, what kind of movie would you make?
Oh my God, yeah, okay, that's a tough one. Wow. I mean, I would want to make 10 movies.
Yeah, yeah.
Why make one on 200 million? I don't need that. For the stories I want to tell, if I could have a 10 to 15 million dollar budget where I know I could get good crew, good actors, and because the one thing I do pride myself in is efficiency. Like for instance, when we did Her Unlikely Kin, I scheduled the entire shootout, all 6 days of it, and I sent that schedule to my crew and actors, and we didn't really vary from it. So I remember like day 2, day 3, the actors and crew coming up to me saying, "Hey, is everything still the same?" Because we're used to like getting call sheets, like the night before, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, you'll get the call sheet, but no, there shouldn't be any change." And by the end of the shoot, very little changes, and everybody came up to me like, "That was insane. I've never worked on a film shoot where like you sent out the schedule weeks in advance, and then it just happened." like, so I say that because I feel like I wouldn't need a lot of money. Like, what kind of film I would want to make? I am drawn to generational stories. Like, I have a note on my phone that's got like 65 different little film ideas, right? But when I look at it, they always kind of rest upon generational stories. Um, the stories of grandfathers and grandsons, or the stories of just, I feel like our world moves so fast now that the generations are so removed from each other. Like, what was the way to do something in my grandfather's generation doesn't exist anymore. Like, you go back 500 years, that wasn't the case, right? You grew up on the farm, you learned how to work the land, you had kids, you died, repeat. Like, that was agrarian society for a very long time. Now it's like, oh, I grew up listening to the radio, and now there's TV. Like, oh, now there's
Yeah.
the internet. Now there's AI. I mean, like in the last 100 years, you can't look at 1924 and 2024 and have any resemblance of a society that looks the same. So I'm fascinated by that because I think there's so many ways to unpack that kind of story. And my personal goal would be to show how we could actually be more connected than we need to be divided. I think there's a lot of things that can divide us, but if we just approach life with a little more curiosity, both as a younger person, right? I challenge my kids, don't just discount older people because they may not understand something. Be curious as to why. Just like me, now that I'm getting older, like being curious about trends and stuff coming up that I'm like, I don't get that, but that's cool that you do. Like, tell me what you love about that. I feel like if I would like to make a film that addresses that, that and anything outdoors. Like I love nature. I love the man versus nature story. I think those are always very compelling to me. And character-driven stuff, character study type film work. Those are the things I'm really drawn to. I love slower-paced films because I feel like even more now, like I think about films from the 70s, just the pacing of those films, I love that. And I feel like it's more relevant now because everything else is so fast. What a gift to sit there for 2 hours and watch a slow-paced film just take you through a story and a character's life that's in depth, that leaves you thinking to where you let those credits roll and you might not even be reading them, but you can't turn it off because you're still thinking about what you just saw. Like those are the kind of films I like to watch. Those are the kind of films I want to make. So you give me $200 million, I can make quite a few of them.
I would love to see it. If I had that kind of money, I would in a heartbeat. And I think you're absolutely right. It's so hard to find movies like that nowadays. I am a big fan of Marvel, and I say that with great pride and a little bit of oh no, I'm a great fan of Marvel. Just because the old Marvel was great. But recently it's been the same formulaic, fast-paced, CGI-filled film.
Punchplosions, the movie.
Exactly. And you're exactly right. I think that the world needs something that is more character-driven, slower-paced. Now, I'm a sucker for action films. I love action. I think there's room for that in a character-driven story. Oh, yeah. But in my opinion, and when I write and when I see other films and read scripts, I feel like it should always come down to the character first. What's the character's arc going to be? And then the plot should revolve around that and not the other way around. And
100%.
I mean, that's how I've always approached writing my stories and scripts and stuff of that sort. Again, that's just my opinion. Some people don't share that. But I think that absolutely would separate somebody like a filmmaker like you or an aspiring one like me from kind of the basic Hollywood movies that have been released.
I think don't be so sad about being a Marvel fan because I think if you think about the Tony Stark arc, here's the thing: I did not care for comic book movies when they started coming. I was a Batman fan, and then the Marvel stuff. I watched the first Iron Man movie, and I was like, "Yeah, it was okay," but I kind of was not into it. It wasn't until my younger son, was like, "Hey, Avengers Endgame, like the first one's coming out, and I want to watch all the movies," and I'm like, "Oh, I'm a dad. I got to do this with you, don't I?" So right. I did. But I got to tell you, there's some stinkers, but there's some really genuinely great filmmaking. And honestly, that character arc of Tony Stark from Iron Man to the end of Avengers, brilliant. So, I think as far as what they did with that first phase, whatever they call it, of the Marvel story was great. Then money got involved, and it hadn't been involved, and I actually got nervous when they created Marvel Studios, because I was like, are they going to be able to maintain a studio based on this? Like, you can maintain 20 films, but what are you going to do after that? And I think that's where they're struggling, is what do you do after that? They're kind of like grasping at straws, I think, from the depths of the comic book universe to try to create something the public connects to. But the hard thing about that is if they didn't connect to the comic books and they were a B, C, kind of line of comic books and not the A line, what makes you think that they're going to have a huge movie audience, which requires even more of an audience than a comic book does? So
right.
You're working on properties like Captain America, like you have on your wall there, or Iron Man, or these massive like entities that have been in the culture for 50 years, and you make a movie out of that, and the whole generations of people are interested because you have older folks who are like, wow, I never thought you could see that happen. Younger folks who just think the stories are cool, just like all young kids do with comic books, right? So I think they had a really unique moment in film history to do that. I don't know where it goes from here, though. I think, I'm not saying there's not a room for comic books. I just don't know where they go. How do you
I don't either.
Yeah. It's going to be
that's super interesting.
Although apparently Batman, you could keep making Batman movies because they're still, like, I did not even want to see that last one I'm like, oh, but it's got Pattinson in it, and he's a fascinating actor, I think. So let's go see what they do with it. And I loved it. Like, it was so good. I'm like, I
Yeah.
did not need another Batman movie, and I love this movie. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was
And then
great. The
Joker too. Like,
cinematography. Oh,
oh
Joker.
yeah,
Yeah.
dude, yeah. And then Joker, Joaquin Phoenix, right? He's one of my favorite actors. So you put him in anything, I'm going to watch it. And it was absolutely awesome. Like, I love that movie. Like, it was a great throwback to Taxi Driver. You know.
Yeah, of course.
So, some really cool moments in it. So, I don't know. That's why I say I look at those two movies, I had zero interest in watching another Batman or Joker movie, but smart filmmakers did something really unique and interesting with those characters. So, can Marvel approach it that way? I don't know. I guess we'll see. But as of right now, they're not. I agree. It seems like they're playing the stats game. Like, like, what do we
Right.
think? It's almost like it'd almost be like telling ChatGPT, write me a screenplay of Marvel characters that the audience will connect to, and it just regurgitates all the stuff it knew before and spits out another idea, and then they're like, yeah, let's do that, and it's like audiences are bored stiff, right? So
Right. Yeah. Online, it's known as superhero movie fatigue,
yep,
which I think is a great name.
yeah. For years, I just always dissed it as Punchplosions the movie, but like,
Yeah.
but
Right.
I had to kind of stop when I got drawn into the whole Avengers saga.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's even another generational thing. Something
Yeah.
maybe, I'm not interested, but my son likes it.
I was already
Might as
burnt out
well.
then because I saw like the 3 Spider-Man movies and they had the Batman saga, and I just was like, do I need more of this? Like, kind of felt like I got my fill because I was a huge Spider-Man fan as a kid. So getting to watch Spider-Man, I was like, that's great, we did it. Like,
Yeah.
so I didn't really see a need for more, but I was proven wrong because I do think that first, whatever, 20-something films that involved the whole Avengers saga was really, really well done.
I think so as well. What is your favorite movie?
Mm. So I have a guilty pleasure movie. Anytime I'm asked this question, I don't like to give the pious Stanley Kubrick answer. I like to give what I actually love to enjoy watching, and I watch it every single year, and it's Tropic Thunder.
Oh my gosh. I love that
I
movie so
love that
much.
movie. I
It's
quote
so
it all the
good.
time. And here's why. I'm going to tell you now. Obviously, it's a fun, insane comedy to watch. Dark comedy in some ways, right? But honestly, Ben Stiller as a director and writer needs to be given some serious credit for that film. It is a
Absolutely.
well-produced action movie, a brilliant comedy, helped resurrect, along with Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr.'s career by giving him what could have been an absolute disaster of a character to play. But because they were so smart in calling out Hollywood and its hypocrisy, and because they're actors themselves, being able to show the ridiculousness of the filmmaking industry through Tropic Thunder, right? Uh, Also, talking about the way people treat and respect veterans when it's convenient to them is in that film, which I think is fantastic. The stolen valor, in that film is fantastically done. Somebody just riding the coattails of other veterans to make a name for themselves. Tom Cruise playing one of the most iconic characters ever. The fact that they didn't care who they offended, and I get it. There's been talk since then, especially about the Simple Jack character and things like that. I personally can empathize with communities that feel offended there. I really can. I get that. I do wish that they understood maybe what I think Ben Stiller's perspective was, which is how ridiculous it is that this action movie star was going to try to save his career by thinking that this was the way to do it, right? And the entire movie, they're making fun of him, the character, for his terrible decision to make this character Simple Jack, right? So it wasn't like it was. I never saw the movies making fun of people like that. I saw it as them making fun of the actors who think that
Right.
doing that is going to win them their Oscar and give them whatever. So yeah, that is when people ask me what my favorite movie is. I'm like, I can't say anything but Tropic Thunder. I love a ton of
Tropic
movies, and
Thunder.
I could tell you different movies why I like them critically, things like that. But I honestly like Tropic Thunder because I think critically it should be more respected. And it's kind of funny now that we're getting further away from the movie. I hear it come up more and more, where especially the Robert Downey Jr. performance. But yeah, no, it's a hysterical, brilliant comedy.
I 100% agree, and I miss that they don't make comedy movies like that. I
Oh
feel
yeah,
like,
you had
yeah,
Tropic Thunder, and then you had my other favorite, The Other Guys. That's my other
the
favorite
other guys. Oh,
guilty pleasure comedy,
yes,
where big budget comedies. These are $100 million comedies, like,
absolutely.
and they
Yeah,
are wonderful to watch.
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah. So that would definitely be my quick answer for my favorite film.
Ever since watching the other guys, I've always wanted to buy a Prius after that
Yeah,
whole chase
I actually had one. I
sequence.
had one for
Really?
years. I had like a Prius V wagon. I really did because I had like a 40-minute commute or almost an hour where I lived. And so yeah, I was like, I need to save some money on gas. Get a
Yeah,
Prius.
yeah,
So
yeah. Seriously.
yeah.
Oh man, yeah, those are both incredible movies. I heard a while ago that Tom Cruise was going to star and produce a Les Grossman solo movie, and I don't know if
I've
that's
heard.
ever going off the ground or not. But I would, yeah, seriously, fingers crossed. You want to talk
Could you
about
imagine what
sequels?
Les? Could you imagine what Les Grossman could do right now in the AI world, where he's trying to just like crap on all the actors and everybody and like go off on AI and what does that? I mean, there could be so much done with that. Like that character,
Absolutely.
there's so
Oh,
much
it'd be
that could be
so
done with that.
funny. Yeah, it would be so funny. All right. Well, we're coming up here on time, but I did have one more question for you. If there are any young, aspiring filmmakers out there, like your son, like myself, like other students, what would you tell them? What would you say to them?
So I'm pretty upfront about the challenge you're going into. This is not a career field that's going to be given to you. This is not a career field that is going to be easy to get into. And the only way, the only pathway to success is a relentless hustle. Like you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to go above and beyond what you think you're even capable of doing. And that's not fair. It's really not. But it is fun work. And if you are somebody who is creative, who is, you know, punctual, oh my gosh, like professional, it will actually go a far way in this industry because that's not natural for a lot of creative types. um, and so what I tell like my students, get there early, be willing to stay late, be willing to do whatever job has to be done on set, but also carve the path you want, right? So I have a friend of mine who I work with named Christoph, and he worked in Hollywood for years and years and years. And we hired him on maybe 4 years ago to where I work now. He was a longtime Steadicam operator and did also compositing in LA for most of his career, right? And so one of the things he told me that I now share is that, when you go to LA or you work in the film business, you have a business card. And that business card says one thing, and that's the what you want to be. Okay? But you better be willing to do anything. So for him, he was a Steadicam operator. That was his calling card, right? But he was a second AD, he was a first AD, he was a PA, he was a grip, he was a guy. He did anything he had to on set, right? To basically keep employed and things like that. So you have to be willing to kind of do that. Um, yeah, and the other thing I'll share too is LA isn't the only path, right? It's a path. But I definitely like to remind my students that if you want to work in creative arts, right? Hollywood, sure, that's like the dream, right? Maybe working in New York or working in Atlanta as crew, right? But there's other pathways. Companies all over America, ad agencies all over America need creative professionals. The government, state governments hired creative professionals. So if you are trying to make the dream breakout happen, and at some point it doesn't, and you're looking for something a little steadier, something with, I would say more reliable pay, benefits, look in those industries and don't consider it. That's the other thing I always warn people is don't consider it copping out. I've had this conversation with my son that there was a time in my life where I just made the decision that this is what I wanted based on what matters to me. Like security in my pay and my benefits and for my family matters more to me than the chance of maybe holding a statue somewhere for a film I made. Like it literally means more to me. So why would I elevate this? Because the world does? Because other people do? No. So, if you get to a point in your life where you realize I am tired of the hustle, I am tired of this, I would prefer my weekends back, maybe to do something else. That is a decision that should be made with a confidence, not a fear. Because I know there's a lot of creatives that are like, oh, if I go into this and it doesn't work out, I'm a failure. No, you're not. You're only a failure if like you totally just, I don't know, like don't put in the effort. That maybe you consider, then maybe you failed. If you didn't put forth the effort, well, then you kind of have yourself to look at. But if you put forth the effort and it doesn't work out, that's you and a bunch of others who were talented and putting forth the effort, and your time, your breakout just didn't happen, right? And there's a point in your life you're like, I want the pay and benefits. Well, there's plenty of opportunities for that. And even if you're like, I don't want to chase the Hollywood dream, like that sounds terrifying. Great, start working your way into internships into big companies. They have creative staffs, like right here in San Antonio, HEB's like the large grocery store. They have a huge creative staff that works within HEB corporate, like government all over the place, state government, state parks. Like there's so much cool work. I almost had a job that I ended up turning down because the federal position came open for me after I left active duty over at Texas Parks and Wildlife, doing their TV show. And I'm like, that kind of was a dream job. I chose the government because I wanted, it was a little bit better pay and the benefits, and I just kind of knew where that career path would have led me. But I mean, how cool would that be to be traveling to Texas state parks and filming and telling these beautiful nature stories? Like, people don't know they exist. So
Yeah, absolutely.
what I would say, like, expand your network. As silly as it may sound, create a LinkedIn account and keep up with it, because I've had that since the beginning, and it's paid off so much for me. Because
That's
I
how
have
we
a
got in
consistent-
touch.
Yeah, that's right. It is how we got in
Yeah.
touch. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah. And I mean, literally, it's an instant link resume you could send to anybody. Here's my life. Boom. And you send it like, wow, this person's done all these things. And also take the time to ask for recommendations, not just the endorsements, but literally, if you do a project for somebody, ask them through LinkedIn for a recommendation. If you look at my LinkedIn, you see recommendations from people that are now marketing managers at USAA, right? Big companies who at one time were, colonels in the Air Force that I worked for. So because I cultivated that over a career, now you look back and it's like impressive looking. And it's just because I kept with it, right? And I would say the same thing to any young person. Like that, Instagram is great for sure for visual stuff, for cinematography, things like that. And they're, great ways to connect. But LinkedIn is, I think, still just something that really could pay dividends in the long run if you keep up with it. So there's a few different things out there, for people coming into this business. But yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Oh, of course. It is super helpful. That's kind of why I decided to start something like this, a podcast, just to see how it goes. And I know that I'm not the only one, but I wanted to start a show like this just because I found it backbreakingly hard to break into the film industry. And I found film school largely unhelpful, surprisingly, in a lot of areas. And so I guess just interviewing people like you who have worked in the industry, other guests that I'm going to have on soon, it gives me, one, the excuse to network, two, to get inside the brains of creatives and filmmakers and really see what makes them tick, and see the route that they took to get there, to get into an industry as tightly closed as the film industry is. And honestly, at the end of the day, it would just have me... It would create for me a network of people that I can reach out to when I have questions, when I want feedback, when I maybe want to get a job. So it's just so helpful, and I know that I'm not the only student who is looking for something like that. So it's just tough. I mean, I think being a creative is different because it's almost like a blessing and a curse at the same time. You don't want to do something where you're not using your creative ability, but the jobs that are open that do have a creative outlet to them are really hard to get, and they're really competitive. And that's exactly where that effort and that confidence and that professionalism that you were talking about comes in.
Yeah. I remember when I was young, before I came in the Air Force, there was my grandmother had a little tiny house. In that little tiny house, she had an even tinier apartment on top that was kind of illegal, but I think she made it work. Anyway, there was a guy who lived there, and he commuted to New York because I used to, like I said, live in Connecticut. He commuted to New York via train, and he sat me down and he gave me this briefcase, and he said, "Take this briefcase. This is where you're going to keep your resume, your business cards, your contacts." This is before, obviously, LinkedIn and things like that. And he was like, "And this is where you're going to build your professional life." And it blew me away because I hadn't even thought about it, and this is somebody taking time to talk to me as an 18-year-old. And now that's kind of what I want to do is tell people like, yeah, build your LinkedIn profile, keep those contacts, network. And don't network for the sense of networking about what you can get out of somebody. Network because you want to give as well as you want to receive, right? One thing I appreciate about you, Miles, is I know you do have a curiosity about you. And I think, when I talked about that being what's needed, I think you've got that. And I know if I ever needed help with something and I reached out to you, you'd respond, and vice versa. And I love the fact that, we did meet on LinkedIn. You literally texted me out of the blue. We hadn't talked in like a year, and you're like, "Hey, you want to do this podcast?" And I'm like, "Heck yeah, that sounds fun." So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it can work, so.
Absolutely. Yeah, the connection was really funny because at the time, a close family member of mine was still working at the National Marrow Donor Association. And
Program. We're
I
so close.
program. Oh my gosh. Oh man, my professionalism is failing. But she was working there, and I had just moved to San Antonio to start school, and she was like, "Hey, there's a filmmaker in San Antonio who is connected to the foundation. You should reach out to him. It looks like he had a bone marrow transplant. He's a director. He works at the Air Force. He's right there." And I was like, "Well, sure, why not? You know." And obviously, it ended up being a great connection. So it's really cool. LinkedIn is such a great spot that people don't suspect would be. I've gotten in touch with screenwriters, other directors, just crazy people who you never think that would respond to a young kid.
It's the space people are willing to respond in. If you reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, I don't know, I may or may not, because that's not necessarily what I'm out there for. But on LinkedIn, if you send me a message on that, it's the place I actually want to talk business. So,
absolutely.
They kind of carved out a niche for themselves, and I think it works.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I will say as a student, it's kind of tough paying the $70 a month premium fee, but I'm working on that.
Wow, it's that much for the LinkedIn premium? Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I got lucky. I had the free trial for a year, and then I just let it expire and haven't used it again because I haven't really needed it. Oh my gosh, I didn't know it was that expensive. Well, they don't give a student discount?
I don't know. I don't believe so. I should
look that up, my friend.
Yeah, seriously.
Everybody gets a student discount. Everybody knows.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, the only reason I'm able to do this is because I get the entire Adobe Creative Cloud for free through IU. Mm-hmm. So it's been majorly helpful. I've been learning how to edit, how to do audio, Premiere Pro. IU has got their hands on some $6,000 equipment. Canon XF605 is what I've been learning to play around with. Awesome camera. I love it. What I'm using to record this is just a little EOS Rebel SL3 that I bought for $250 used off the internet. So it's nice getting to put my hands on stuff that I could never afford and learn.
That is one of the benefits of film school. And I tell my students day one in the directing class, a lot of what I'm going to teach you, you can learn in books and on YouTube. But you're here because you're building relationships with the students to your left and to your right. You're here because you can ask me direct questions that you can't ask the internet easily or a book easily.
Absolutely.
And you're here because you have access to equipment that's going to enable you to, actually accomplish the vision you have in ways that you couldn't do without it. So I hope that's where you understand your investment's going to. It's not going because it's the only place you can get this information. And I think that's any college right now. If you're, there's most things if you want to learn, you can learn by researching the right things. But that's a difficult thing to do,
Yeah.
So school can help with that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I guess I should clarify when I said earlier that I found film school largely unhelpful. It had nothing to do with the staff or the equipment that they've offered. It's more so just the credits and the kind of barrels that I've had to hop over to take classes that I'm taking right now. They offer all these crazy requirements that you have to go fulfill before you can take a production class, and it's can I just take it now? Can I do all that now? Can I screenwrite now? Do I have to take game theory and math or whatever? So that's been one of my main gripes about film school. But in terms of the people that I've met, students and staff alike, in terms of the equipment that I've had access to, it's been incredible. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure I'm going to continue to learn more in these next 2 semesters here and over the summer and stuff. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that is where the investment is going, and that's the one thing that has kept me sane and in school, thinking about that. So,
well, I appreciate you saying that because my son's about to start. He's a senior now, and we've been looking at film schools, and we're trying to balance. He's smart. He doesn't want to be buried in debt either, so he's trying to weigh the cost benefit analysis of film school, and we'll see where he ends up and what scholarships. Knock on wood, get through. But it's not an easy choice.
No, not at all. Well, if he ever wants to come to IU, I'll show him around.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right. Well, I think we're on time, but I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story and taking the time to do this. It's been great.
Thanks, Miles. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, of course. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.